that leads us to the next question of discipline and tantrums. I mean, that's a very important topic for normal parents as well. And so, when should we think of discipline, and what should be the basic approach in terms of how to discipline them?
In terms of when do we start, the earlier the better is definitely what I would suggest. Helping the child set a routine is one of the most important things when it comes to discipline, because it gives them a predictability of how the day is going to be or what is next expected for them. A lot of times, behavioral challenges in terms of tantrums or meltdowns are because one, the child is not able to communicate what they want to, and two, they do not have control over the environment. For the child, behavior is the best way they're communicating and trying to get control over the caregiver or the environment. So an early introduction of routine into the structure, early introduction of how we respond to the behavior becomes very, very important. So we often say ABC. A is the antecedent, which is the trigger for a behavior for a child. B is the behavior in itself, which could be a tantrum, a meltdown, a crying episode. And C is the consequence. So what very often we notice is when we are able to modify the trigger and the consequence, the behavior settles in a large number, almost 80 to 90% of the time. What as parents or caregivers usually we tend to do in is respond to their behavior by giving in. So let's say the child wants more screen time and ends up crying, or the child wants a particular toy or an object, and there's excessive crying, meltdown, and just uncontrollable challenging behavior. A caregiver may just give in and say, okay, now let's just control the crying. You can take what you want, you can keep what you want. But over time, we notice the child's learning this as a way of communicating. That if I cry, I get what I want. Or if I have a tantrum, this is how the response is going to be. And us modifying that consequence can change the behavior with time. So initially, yes, there'll be a lot of continuation, but subsequently the child understands this is not the way for me to get to a particular endpoint. And therefore, simultaneously, we help co-regulate the child, teach them what are the other ways in which they can communicate, and have a more disciplinary system to help them regulate themselves emotionally as well.
Yes, as you said, I mean, better to start young because we are setting the rules and the approach to the rules. So don't hesitate when the child starts understanding what is around them. So, say for 5 to 6 months is a reasonable time because that's where they learn from what they observe. And if you set the rules, you have the limits of acceptance, and then you stick with it consistently, irrespective of how you feel during that time. I mean, sometimes you're tired and your thresholds are different. That will confuse the child. So having consistency, having the limits set early, and if you have siblings, how the siblings are treated as well matters. And in terms of punishment and so on, it doesn't work very well. The child is not old enough to understand, so you have to have a clear rule. So that leads us to tantrum management. Unfortunately, even if you have a good background to discipline, tantrums do happen. That's part of the child's learning process. So what is your approach? I mean, do you suggest a naughty time or naughty corner? And how do you approach tantrums, and what do you advise parents?
Tantrums, especially around the twos, like we call the terrible twos, it's a very, very common phenomenon. For most parents, we do tell them to understand that at this age, the child's understanding is a lot better. So receptively, they're aware of a lot of things. They understand your language, but they may not be able to communicate as much. And that leads to the discrepancy that, okay, I understand you're telling me no to something and trying to explain, but I don't know how to communicate back to you and try to explain it back. So it ends up being a tantrum. These are often seen to reduce by the time they're about 3 and over because their language improves very significantly. With the tantrums, which are in a controllable manner, we often tell them to co-regulate with them, which means you try distraction techniques, you try to have a control over the environment, you try to take them away from the entire area which is causing this chaos for them, and try to help them calm themselves, and then maybe reason out what could be the best way working forward. Whereas sometimes we do see it could be an emotional dysregulation to a very significant extent, where they're, let's say, rolling on the floor, just impossible to connect or what is happening. at which point we do tell them that just take them away from there, be with them, regulate with them, try to get them off that scenario, and maybe use a later experience to connect back with the child in terms of what could have been done or what is happening. And that has to be on a very regularized basis that is happening. So again, the same rule of ABC applies even there. Most often our consequences decide how the child's behavior is going to be. So if it is something on a smaller day-to-day basis, we can try these simple techniques of distraction-free, reinforcing the rules, helping them. One of the things which really helps a lot is visual schedules. At that age, children connect a lot to visual cues that are provided. So let's say there's a tantrum going on, they see a visual schedule of what needs to be done to calm themselves down. So it could be, okay, let's go jump on the trampoline so that we are more calmer. Or let's go scribble something and paint something so we relax ourselves. And then coming back to renegotiating what the child wants in a much more calmer space gives them a better ability to connect with the child and speak to them.
Okay, so do you recommend naughty time at all, or you don't believe in that?
Yes, usually timeout is something which we do recommend, but most often the timeout is misinterpreted in a way that when we say timeout, most parents think it's a punishment. So they say, okay, you go to the corner, you just stay by yourself, no more doing what you're doing. But rather, timeout session, on the other hand, should be a safe space for the child to regulate themselves. So it should not be facing the wall or just standing there or being punished, because that's not going to help the child, especially if they're younger. They will feel more frustrated. They don't know what to do, how to control their emotions. So we always say timeout should be a safe space, just like how we all have safe space as an adult. We may just go to the space where we feel, calmer and do things which will help us feel regulated. So even for the child, it should be a place where they look forward to going to calm themselves. So they can have their favorite toys, or they can have an instrument which they enjoy. They can have things which help them feel more regulated. And that's the space where the child can be co-regulated as well. So the parent can also be with the child along there and say, okay, I'm right here. You take your time, you calm down, you relax, and then you come back to the other environment, which is, where you start interacting and doing things. So we don't want that to be a punishment zone, rather like a safe space and a regulating zone, which will help them to be emotionally more settled.
Yes, thank you. And in terms of, the parents can anticipate when the situation where the child is going to tantrum, for example, going to a new place, or when they are tired, having to go out. I mentioned the example of the parents working till late and expecting their child to be fresh and alert when they go to the mall at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. So avoiding such scenarios, giving them the proper rest, proper nutrition, avoiding junk food, chocolates, crisps, all these stimulants, even fizzy drinks. Many parents are aware of the harmful effects of fizzy drinks, but still it comes into the picture. So excessive salt, excessive sugar, inadequate hydration, everything goes together in unhealthy lifestyle. Inadequate activity. If they have good physical activity, obviously they'll go to sleep well and they will be fresh the next day. But if they are watching screen time, they're getting these stimulant foods. It's a mix of balance. So tantrums happen for a certain reason, and consistent approach is important as well, avoiding them if possible, and consistency in managing them irrespective of what mood or frame you are as a couple. Again, between the parents, there may be discrepancies in how each one deals, and there may be a soft parent and someone who is tougher. So it becomes difficult for the child to understand. And if you are in a combined family or the grandparents are visiting, that makes it even more difficult.
And
So,
sometimes, very rightly, like you said, the children are very smart in a way where they understand which parents give in, whom to
yeah.
go to when they want certain things to be done.
And
And
many
parents
times
usually
it
come and
even
tell us,
leads to, yeah, parents start fighting with each other, isn't it?